Not that long ago, I was watching Friends for the millionth time, and there was one particular character who, to me, screams ADHD, and that character is Rachel Green. My name is Jo, and this is ADHDefined. Please take note, I am not trying to officially diagnose anybody, I am not a medical professional, this is just a bit of fun and I think something that's quite interesting. Now, I think we all know Rachel. She's fun, loyal, caring, career-driven, a bit of a princess, and she's Ross's lobster, of course. But what is it about her that could indicate that she could possibly have ADHD, in particular the inattentive type? Let's have a look at the symptoms. Those with this particular type of ADHD tend to or have made careless mistakes in the past, myself included, and Rachel has done too. She works as a waitress at the Cafe Central Perk at the start of the series. Now, this is a job that she hates and has no passion for whatsoever. She often gets orders wrong. She has to go through training again and again, and she realises she's been doing things differently or wrong from the other waitresses. When she eventually leaves this job, she types up her resume, but she doesn't notice a spelling mistake, having not read it through properly. She let Ross's monkey Marcel escape after not realising that the apartment door was open. She lost the engagement ring Barry gave her in the lasagna. She is also partially responsible for locking everybody out of the apartment on Thanksgiving. She doesn't notice the stuck together pages of the cookbook and ends up making an English trifle and shepherd's pie mashup. And she's also known to be a bit of a bad cook. After being picked last for the Thanksgiving football game, she takes little interest and goes and buys a pretzel instead. She locks Phoebe's cab with the keys still inside. She forgets her passport when she leaves for London, but she knows exactly where it is at home. She accidentally causes a fire in Phoebe's apartment after leaving her hair straighteners on. She borrows and loses one of Monica's earrings and says that this is why she isn't allowed to borrow Monica's things because she always ends up losing them. Monica doesn't want to trust Rachel with looking after her wedding dress because she thinks she won't do a good job. Rachel also forgets about Monica's grandmother, who she was meant to put in the cab safely after the wedding rehearsal dinner. She breaks Joey's chair, Rosita. She forgets to send off some important contracts at her Ralph Lauren job. She's adamant that she's done it, but instead tries to blame her assistant Tag when she realises she messed up. Are you still with me? Even with the inattentive type of ADHD, we can be prone to impulsiveness and not really thinking about the consequences of our actions, and over the entire show, Rachel is very impulsive. In the pilot episode, she leaves Barry at the altar to head to New York City and go and live with her childhood best friend. She is an impulsive shopper and has a bad handle of her finances. Same. She goes out with Jean-Claude Van Damme even though she knows Monica likes him. She quits her job at Central Perk without another job lined up. When she's working as a personal shopper, she threatens to quit, again without another job lined up. She flies to London last minute to confess her love to Ross. She spends $1,000 on a cat, whilst owing money to Monica. She later hires Tag as her assistant because she's attracted to him, and dates him even after being warned not to. She tends to go back to men that she's been with previously. She sleeps with Barry when he's engaged to her ex-best friend Mindy. Goes back to Paolo after Ross comes home from China with Julie, and even on her prom night she goes back to Chip even after he failed to turn up on time. And of course, not to mention being on and off again with Ross throughout the entire series. They were never on a break. She agrees to fly to Greece with Ross on what was meant to be his honeymoon. She wants to tell him about her feelings for him after he married Emily. She hires Monica to make all of her romance decisions, but ends up ignoring her and firing her anyway. She kind of proposes to Joshua, having only been on a few dates with him. She later kisses her new colleague Gavin on the balcony, having not known him very long at all. Monica doesn't want Rachel to drive her Porsche because she is known to be a bad driver. We know this because when she does drive, she's a bit careless and she's prone to speeding, and she doesn't have a valid driver's license. She eats cheesecake off the floor. She doesn't really have a filter, and she ends up oversharing her situation to strangers and the passenger next to her on the flight to London. She's known to have a bit of a gossiping problem, and Monica even suggests that she gives up gossiping for her New Year's resolution. And of course, she got off the plane. Spoilers. If you're a fan of the show, you'll know that it might take Rachel a little longer to do certain tasks. For example, when Monica repeatedly asks Rachel to take down the lights from Christmas, she finally does it when it's freezing outside, ends up falling off the balcony and injuring herself. She tends to avoid doing housework as much as possible. When Monica is getting worked up about Rachel doing the dishes, Rachel is instead at home reading a magazine and only pretends to do them when she thinks Monica is coming home. When the time comes for her to move out of Monica's apartment, it's moving day and she still hasn't packed. It takes her all day to do the newspaper crossword by herself. Well, almost by herself. Rachel even changed her college major because there wasn't any parking in the psychology building. She gets very overwhelmed when Ross is planning their futures together, like how many kids they're going to have and even their names. People with ADHD often have trouble visualising and planning the future, and Rachel only wants to think about what's happening over the next few days. She likes not knowing what's going to happen after leaving her controlled and planned out life with Barry behind. She's been known to feel lost in her life as well. When she's working at Central Perk, she knows she's full of potential, but she gets frustrated because she doesn't know how to execute her goals. When she eventually gets a job in fashion, she tells Ross that this is the first time in her life that she's doing something that she cares about and that she's good at, showing that she can really apply herself with things that she is passionate about. A big part of ADHD is not really knowing how to handle your emotions, and I think this is something that Rachel struggles with as well, and she is known to be pretty sensitive. For example, when the building superintendent Mr. Trigger shouts at her for stuffing the rubbish chute with pizza boxes, because, she avoids doing housework so she doesn't know how to do it properly. He makes her cry and she is visibly upset about it all day and just can't let it go, which leads Monica to say that
Rachel always cries!
People with ADHD tend to have low self-esteem, and Rachel is understandably very upset when she finds the pros and cons list that Ross wrote about her. We know she doubts herself and has insecurities, and to see these written down as reasons for someone not to be with her would be extremely devastating, and I would imagine she would be feeling very rejected. She is labelled as a pushover from Phoebe, but really I would argue that she avoids confrontation as much as possible and has a tendency to people please. She gets very frustrated with Monica when they're arguing over Jean-Claude Van Damme, and Rachel ends up flicking Monica in the face when she keeps talking over her. Yeah, we hate that. At New Year, Rachel comes home after an altercation at the airport with a woman over a cab. She's visually shook up and traumatised, but her thoughts immediately go to whether people are liking the homemade dip she made. It takes a lot for her to stand up for herself to her boss Joanna at Bloomingdale's and gets very upset and overwhelmed when doing so. Her emotions can sometimes get intense, as very early on she's crying to Phoebe's current shrink boyfriend Roger about a childhood toy she had, the Weebles, whilst everyone else is talking about their childhood traumas. This might mean she's having trouble letting something go from her past, and this is a very common trait for people with ADHD. She cries at Monica organising her wedding and gets very overwhelmed when she's helping her look for a wedding dress amongst the bargain shoppers. Rachel doesn't really seem to be a big fan of change either, as she gets very upset and intense at having to swap apartments with Joey and Chandler. And she can't get her head around moving out when Monica and Chandler decide to live together. On the night of Monica and Chandler's engagement, Rachel feels so sad about it all that she turns to Ross for comfort and a bonus night. All this did was remind her that she wasn't getting married and she felt behind in comparison to her friends. There may be all these symptoms that apply to Rachel, but as well as all these, she is also incredibly loyal to her friends. She goes out of her way to do thoughtful things for them and make their day. She is so passionate about her career in fashion, and she goes for what she wants because that is what interests her. She's also really funny, sarcastic, witty, and has a great sense of humour. I've seen people who watch Friends label Rachel as lazy, spoiled, dumb, and even a bitch. But would her possibly having ADHD change the narrative at all? I've grown up watching Friends, and it still remains one of my go-to comfort shows to this day. It'd be a good reason why I grew up relating to Rachel the most out of the 6 friends, and why she's also one of my favourite characters. Like I said at the start, this is just a bit of fun and something that I've never seen being talked about. So what do you think? Does Rachel Green have ADHD? Leave a like, subscribe, comment down below if there was anything I missed, and which Friends character is your favourite. Go check out the other videos on my channel. I'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.